whole challenge is really how to get marketers to get more accountable as businessmen and not really look at marketing in silos and say that you're responsible not just for revenues, but also for the amount of money that you're spending behind getting the revenues. Right? So this is the way traditionally we've been looking at marketing, and one of the big use of analytics in ITC has really been to kind of understand the marketing return on investment. Right? So the kind of questions that we spoke about on how much money to spend on what is really what we've tried to address. So this is for one of our brands, and this is a market modeling that we did where we kind of figured out that television kind of accounts for almost 27% of the brand's volume, right? So if I put a TV ad, I know that that kind of accounts for 27% of the brand volume, right? There is something from print, there is something from radio, there is something from halo effect, right? Sundar also spoke about halo effect. So this is actually a brand of snacks called Bingo, and this is for potato chips. We also have another sub-brand in Bingo called Mad Angles, right? So we figured out that whenever we used to advertise for Bingo Mad Angles, there was some lift in sales as far as Bingo potato chips was also concerned. I mean, there was obviously some lift in sales on Mad Angles, but it also seemed to have a rub-off effect on potato chips, right? And then there was some distribution which kind of accounted for about 9%. But we had this big thing called a base sale, right, which is almost 32%. So we kind of tried understanding what this base sale was. And what we figured out is that about 10% of the base sale is again kind of linked to distribution, which actually when we delved a little deeper, we figured out it was actually more to do with visibility in the shop that was actually driving this. But the reality is that there was about 90% that was unexplained. So despite doing all this modeling, there is about 30% of my sale which I was not able to explain on why I was getting this sale. Now the reality also is that because of the variables that we considered in this research, it obviously does not reflect things like product quality, pricing, the role of PR, word of mouth, retailer recommendation of the product to the consumer, etc., etc. But even as we went forward and we've tried this in other brands and we start incorporating all these variables, there is still a significant proportion that we believe we are not able to explain on why the sale happens. So like good marketers, since we are not able to explain that, we jargonized it and we called that as brand equity, right? So we said, you know, every brand has a resident brand equity that comes because of knowledge of the brand, that comes because I've been using this brand over a period of time, my parents have been using it, it's something that is handed over, it is something almost a habit, so I don't think twice when I go to a shop and actually pick up this brand. So I'm not able to explain any of this, so I've called it as brand equity and said that, you know, it always happens in all these modelings, there's about 30% of the stuff that I'm not able to explain, right? So then we went a little deeper and said, can I actually figure out the return on investment of each of these media elements, right? So this is a relatively new brand. We launched this brand in 2007. So we looked at about 3 years of data to kind of figure out what's happening, right? So 2007 we launched, and as you can see, this unexplained part, right, became a fairly substantial component within about a year, and right, and that continues to grow every year and reaches about 276 units, right? First 3 years we were good guys, we kept the price in line with competition, then the business pressures started, people started knocking on our doors and saying, where is the dhanda, right? So we started running promotions, right? So we cut the price. You know, what happens? Sales goes up, right? And in fact, in that particular year, a significant proportion of the sales actually comes out of proportions. What's the other interesting thing? Television, which is the one in yellow. Every year, it accounts for a significant proportion of the sales in that particular year. The other interesting thing that we took out of this is the role of radio and print, right? It did not play a big role in the first couple of years, but when we started increasing the investments in really 2009 in radio and print, throughout the year, it accounted for a significant proportion of the sales. Now, the interesting thing about radio and print is that it may be accounting only for a relatively smaller proportion compared to television, but it also costs a lot lesser, right? So typically to put out a radio or a print ad, or to get 1 GRP from radio or print, would typically cost about 1/3 or 1/4 the amount of money that it would take you to get a similar GRP from television, right? So that was another significant this thing. And the role of distribution, right, as the brand starts to become larger, as the brand starts reaching more number of outlets across the country, its impact on the overall sales is also quite significant, right? So for us, I think the biggest learning for us in the whole thing is that the challenge is always, when I do a marketing campaign for a brand, you know, how many media should I use? Is it better that I put all the money behind television, right, because it accounts for a significant proportion of the volume, or is it better to look at a kind of a 360 approach where I put money behind other media? So what this seems to indicate, that even mediums, smaller mediums like radio and television and print, if used smartly in the right markets, can actually give a significant uptake as far as your sales is concerned. The next question is, how much is enough, right? So I know television is big. I know it accounts for almost 30% of my sales, but how much money to put in television, right? So this was an analysis that we kept doing, and what we figured out is that, so this is really what you see on the top is really the inflection point. So what is my impact on sale as I increase the amount of spend on television? This is just a kind of an elasticity curve right below, saying that where is it that the elasticity starts becoming less than 1. So what you see here is that if I was to do 400 GRPs, right, and the moment every GRP that I do more than 400 GRP, I get diminishing rates of return. So what it says is that for every additional 1% increase in GRP after 400, my sale will increase by less than 1%, right? So this is what is called as the optimum or the ideal amount of GRPs that actually I should be deploying, right? And 3,100 is where it completely becomes zero. So any additional GRPs that you put in beyond 3,100, or every rupee that you spend beyond that, is not going to give you any incremental sale. So now I know that I basically need to operate between 400 to 3,000. What it also tells me is that there is this number that you see called 1,100 GRPs, right? So 400 GRPs is the point of inflection on spends, but 1,100 GRPs for us was the point of inflection on, it got cut, was the point of inflection on gross margins, right? So even if I was to put more GRPs beyond 400, for every 1% I was getting less than 1% increase in sales, but the gross margins on the product were relatively high, so that it did not matter, and the expenditure was a relatively small proportion of the total turnover, that even if I was to put more GRPs and I was getting lesser and lesser rates of return, but in absolute quantum of money, I was making more than what I was making before, right? So this helped me decide that if I was to go at about 1,000 GRPs a month, I will actually maximize profit for the organization, right? How do we schedule it? So even if I decide to do 1,000 GRPs in a month, or 1,000 GRPs in a month, or 3,000 GRPs in a year, should I do it all in 2 months in a year, at the time of IPL, when KBC is running, right, or when India is playing Pakistan, or should I spread the advertising throughout the year, right? So now we are talking about a snack product which is pretty much bought by consumers maybe once or twice a week. So there are actually about close to about 100 purchase occasions in a year. So focusing all your advertising during certain times of the year may not be a smart idea, because consumers are constantly going out and buying this particular product, right? So when we changed, and what you see here is that earlier we used to do these bursts, right? So we had a big burst in May, June, and we had another big burst in Jan, Feb. When we decided to change it and kind of spread with the same amount of money over a period of time, we actually had found that there was a 3% increase in sales that actually happened. This is a bit more technical to say that how do you kind of run these GRPs, and you can run it in a manner that what you call as there is a long tail, that a lot of people or a small amount of people see you a lot many more times, or you run it in a manner that everybody kind of sees you about 3-4 times. And in our experience, if we find that the messaging is very complex, it is better to show the message to people more number of times. And if the message is relatively simple, it's quite intuitive in that sense. right? Where do we distribute? Okay. What this seems to indicate is that in general stores, which is typically Kirana stores, right? Any further increase in distribution of bingo is not going to give me too much of returns, because I've already kind of reached the maximum in terms of sales that I'm going to get by hitting Kirana stores. Well, not maximum in terms of sales, but in terms of efficiency. So what it means is it takes me money to go to new stores. I have to appoint a salesman, I have to get distributors, and so on and so forth. So the cost of going to new stores is going to outweigh the benefits that I'm going to get in terms of new sales.